Well, thank you very much, and thank you all for joining us wherever you are. Here in Australia, of course, it's just after 7 o'clock in the morning, hence it's very dark outside behind me here. But it's a full moon today. I don't know whether any of you know that, but a full moon in Sagittarius in about 12 hours from now, and it's very close to the planet Jupiter, which means some wonderful knowledge. It's a great time to be talking about all of these things. I'm also an astrologer, so, you know, I get a little bit in there every now and then. So the topic today is about reincarnation or past lives. I've just written my fourth book and just had it released called Past Lives Unveiled. And that's just been out a few weeks now. And it's now available, I guess, in the United States and also in the UK. So why? I've written, this is the third part of a trilogy, actually. I started off in 2011 when a book called Afterlife, Uncovering the Secrets of Life After Death was published here in Australia, and a couple of years later over in the States and various other parts of the world. And then that followed up with a sequel by the name of No Goodbyes. All of this came because I was contacted from the other side. My partner passed over many years ago, in 1997 actually, and we were only together for a few short years. I've written about this at length in my book Afterlife, but when she contacted me from the other side, through various mediums all around the world, I kept on getting this message: when are you going to write a book? When are you going to write a book about everything? Because I'd already gone from being a mainstream radio and TV presenter across into studying astrology and then mediumship and psychic work and everything like that. So I got fed up with being nagged from the other side, actually, because every now and then I would get this message. A very good friend of mine, the late Bob Murray in Canada, once contacted me and said, "Hey, Barry, I got this guy, this girl called Judy on the other side, and she says to me, when are you going to write that book?" I thought, oh, God, if I'm getting nagging from Canada, from the Afterlife, I'd better start writing. So I did, and it's been absolutely an amazing experience. My contacts with the other side have been quite outstanding. I have a group of people I work with, including a guy called John Dingwall, who was a very well-known writer and film producer. And John is I call him my spoke spirit, because he represents a group of spirits on the other side. There's about 100 in all, and they talk through John because, as you know, they don't have vocal cords over there, so they all communicate by thought, but they're able to broadcast through him. And my guide at the time told me it was like when I was a newsreader, I was the newsreader bit. All the other journalists and all the other people behind me were the ones who are getting me the information, and that's the same with John. So John told me I would actually be writing more than one book. After the first book, I was told, yep, there's another one. And then after the second one, which was No Goodbyes, I was told, yes, there'll be three, a trilogy. So the trilogy is past lives. And I'm telling you all this because people want to know, why would you write a book about past lives? Well, I've been fascinated by past lives all my life. Two things. I've been fascinated by time travel and also past lives. And now when we start looking at the whole area of quantum consciousness, and we can find out that we are living many, many lives at the same time, as a lot of people will find out. It's a pretty deep subject. I won't go too much into that at this particular stage. But that's a reason why I've written this particular book. And I had a lot of people asking me about past lives. So then I decided to really get in. As soon as I started researching, then everything just unfolded. It just fell into place. And that's what happened with my other books, because as I said, I do get a lot of help from the other side. And I guess having studied mediumship, that helps as well, because I am in communication with my guides, and a couple of them quite senior, shall we say, on the other side. Old, I don't use the word old souls or anything like that, but they are wonderful people. So the purpose of past life research is not just some kind of Hollywood time tunnel experience. It's not, oh, guess what I was in a past life? Because a lot of people think this, that, oh, well, you know, everybody says they were Cleopatra or, you know, Julius Caesar or, you know, King Henry VIII or something like that. Who'd want to be King Henry VIII? I don't know. But 8 wives or 7 wives or whatever. But I haven't found too many famous people, and all the other researchers that I've known and spoken to, none of them have really found anybody famous. A few people claim to have been famous. I know somebody who claims to have been a pope in one life and a queen in the other. But then again, I become a bit skeptical about that. We're all allowed to be skeptical at some time. People often ask me, what about skeptics? What do you think about them? I said, well, I'm skeptical about certain things. I'm skeptical about big pharma. I'm skeptical about many different things. But the ancient skeptics, the Greek skeptics, were the ones who questioned things. That was skepticism, but they questioned it with an open mind. Today, the closed-minded ones are the ones that, well, I don't even worry about them. They don't want to believe. Well, they'll find out in the long run, maybe 7 or 8 lives from now. Who knows? So why don't we remember our past lives? That's a lot of the questions that I get. Well, when we're born, a kind of veil drops down, and it's not sort of like a theater curtain or anything like that, but it's a veil into our mind, into our consciousness. And otherwise, if you can imagine, if we came back every time with the memory of all of these past lives that we've had crowding into our consciousness, and at very inopportune moments, you can imagine being in a situation where you might be meeting somebody for the first time, and all of a sudden you have this memory that they murdered you in a past life, or ran away with your partner, or cheated you out of your inheritance, or whatever. Well, you would be very sort of upset by that. So we don't have, and that's a very simple way of looking at it, but we don't need all of these other memories. Plus, we're given a fresh new start every time. Having only one life doesn't make sense to me. I've never, ever thought we only ever have one life. Even as a kid, I believed that we had many, many lives. And you think about it, that there are people who are born who only spend a few hours on this planet. There are people who spend a few weeks, months, years, and others who live on to be 100 plus. Why? Why is it so uneven? Only because every time we come back, it's a whole new experience. We're coming back for a reason. We're coming back to learn, to develop our soul. And that is the purpose of life, soul development, so that we eventually don't have to keep on coming back here. Earth is such a wonderful training ground, a learning ground, but it's not the only world. And I'll get onto that very shortly, because we've had some amazing research into life on other worlds as well, in other lives. And I'll guarantee that probably most of you who are watching today have already had lives on other worlds, but I'll hold that one to a little bit later. So children will often remember past lives because the veil is still pretty thin when they're born. And there's a guy called Dr. Ian Stevenson, who was chair of psychiatry at University of Virginia. Dr. Stevenson passed over a few years ago now, but he did some amazing research into children, about over 3,000 case studies. And he did it from a university, from a scientific or an academic point of view, and he came up with some amazing information. Some of you have probably read or heard about Ian Stevenson. You may have read some of his works, but the children that he did regress, he found that most children who had past life memories, it started very young, usually about 2 or 3 years of age, and then they would have vivid memories. But then by the time they got to about 7 or 8, it really started to fade and then disappear. There's probably a reason for that, because when we're born, we don't have all that much in our consciousness. As I said, the veil has been dropped, but certain memories will linger there. And maybe we're meant to remember them. Maybe that's part of our karma. Maybe that's something that we do need as a child to know this. But Ian Stevenson has had some amazing case studies with so many people, so many children who remembered other lives, and a couple of famous ones where several children remembered being born in a village or a town near where they are now, and they talked about their other family from a very young age. And when it was all checked out, and the parents finally had enough of all this, my other family, you're not my real family, all that sort of thing, they would go and check this out, and to their amazement, they would find that the child is right, that they do remember that particular town, that family, that area, and circumstances within that family that there's no way that they could possibly have known about as a young child. So then, in certain cases, the families have sort of accepted all of this, and the child has become, well, I read one case about a young girl who actually went over and found her sons from her previous life, who of course were well and truly grown up by then. And here she is as a young girl coming back as their mother in another lifetime. Pretty hard to accept, I guess, for many people. But anyway, it all did work out. But Professor Ian Stevenson has had some amazing stories with children. And he, if you're really interested, I would urge you to have a look at some of his work. He's written several books, and a lot of his information is available out there, case studies. He talks about other things that people bring back, like birthmarks from a death in a previous life. And some of his research is that they do show up, that a birthmark can be where somebody actually had an accident or was killed or whatever from a previous life. So he's had some fascinating information. I've written quite a bit about Ian Stevenson and his research in my book as well. So this brings us across to the question of other families. So we have soul families. And I guess some of you have already thought about all this or read about it or whatever, because you're a group of people who are very interested in the afterlife, obviously. And the whole area of soul families may well have intrigued you enough to do some research for yourself. But on the other side, we do have soul families and we have extended soul families. We tend to have a soul family which is fairly small, and we'll often travel backwards and forwards from lifetime to lifetime with members of that soul family. And then we'll have other members of families that are like an extended soul family. And all of these people come and go in our various lives. So what is the purpose of all this? As I said before, learning as much as we possibly can, having as many experiences as we can, so we can develop as souls. And that is the most important thing, this development, so that then we've had enough experiences so that we don't have to keep coming back to Earth. We can then move on to other dimensions in the afterlife, or we can move on to other worlds. We can move on to helping other people. A lot of us come back as spirit guides or teachers on the other side as well. There are so many roles that we can all play after we've graduated, shall we say, from the University of Earth. A lot of people will ask me, how many lives do we have? Well, life is a unique thing. We've got over 7 billion people on this planet, and each one is unique. Every story is unique. It's quite amazing when you think about it, isn't it? Over 7 billion unique stories, and we're all the star of our own life. So it just is logical that we're all going to have many different kinds of numbers attached to the incarnations that we have. Depends how fast or slow we are at learning the lessons, I guess. So we keep coming back, we keep making mistakes, but we learn from our mistakes, hopefully. But we do come back with karma, and we'll often come back with karma associated with our soul families. Now that karma, it's a bit of an overused word these days. It tends to sort of be a bit of an in word, but I'll use it anyway. Karma is not some kind of vengeance. It's not payback time. It's balance. It's also action. There's another translation of it, action. And it's action and reaction. Quite often, if we've had one experience in one lifetime, we need to come back and balance that with a lifetime experience this time around that balances that out, maybe the other side of the coin. But karma is not something that we only create ourselves. Karma can be created by family so that we can all work together, and we can work together with other people's karma as well. We all come back to help each other. We may not know it because all this is locked in the subconscious. And when we start working on this karma, that's how we can resolve, and that's how we can work out whether or not our purpose in life is being achieved. But there are many forms of karma. In fact, I was just looking at something last night on the news here in Australia about the whole question of euthanasia is coming up, and very, very strongly. I always had an open mind about euthanasia until my group on the other side told me that euthanasia is frowned on in spirit. They do not feel that euthanasia is something, and they don't not feel that they know euthanasia is not good, because sometimes the greatest lessons we can learn in life may be learned in those last few days, weeks, months, and it may be a really troubling time. But in those times, the lessons we really need to learn from that lifetime and maybe other lifetimes can be such that if we cut it off, then we may have to come back again and do it all again. So that's another kind of karma. And when I was watching this on TV last night, I suddenly thought there's this huge move in Australia now, and I think in various other parts of the world, to accept euthanasia. And I just wonder, I know it's a personal choice, but I just wonder what the long-term effects of things like this are going to be. Accessing our past lives, that's always the question. How do I get in touch with my past life? Well, there are many ways. I mean, you can sometimes just understand or have an attraction to a certain time in history that you can't explain. The deja vu, whether it's a time, a place, a series of events, or whatever. And that kind of deja vu can give you a little hint. The subconscious is giving you a hint of where you may have been. But if you really want to find out a lot about, pardon me, if you want to find out more about your past lives, and as I said before, it's not some kind of Hollywood time tunnel experience. You're doing it for a reason. You're doing it for healing. You're doing it for learning. You're doing it for soul growth. But if you really want to find out and you feel a great necessity for it, maybe you have done meditation, maybe you've had some spiritual advice, then the best way is definitely through a past life therapist, but a qualified past life therapist, not somebody who specializes in helping people give up smoking or gambling or something. It's a very special thing. Now, I've worked with a guy called Peter Smith with my latest book. Peter is the outgoing president of the Michael Newton Institute in the United States. Now, you probably all know Michael Newton, the late Dr. Michael Newton, author of Journey of Souls, Destiny of Souls, Life Between Lives, an iconic figure and an amazing man. Well, I tried to contact Michael Newton a few years ago to do an interview, and I was referred to Peter. And Pete and I have now become really close friends because Pete lives in Melbourne here in Australia and been traveling backwards and forwards to America doing various things. And Pete helped me with this book. And Peter is trained in past life therapy by Michael Newton himself. So what better qualification can you have? A man who did over 8,000 past life regressions himself. So Peter's helped me in many ways, and that's the kind of expertise. You're not always going to be able to get somebody as good as Pete, but there are people who are trained through the Newton Institute. So that's always a very good referral place. Anybody who's been trained through the Newton Institute, you can guarantee that they have had the right kind of training and they're going to be doing it for the right reasons and in the right way. So Pete's helped me. He's written the introduction for my book, Past Lives Unveiled, and he also regressed me on several occasions, 3 for this particular book, but I've had another one too, which is quite a fascinating one, just a few weeks ago. It's a funny thing. I don't know whether any of you have had past life regression or not, but I see a few heads nodding and hands going up. Well, that's great. I mean, it's once again, it's like life. It's a unique experience. And I don't know how you people who've had it felt, but when it's recorded, as it always must be, when you listen back, I'm thinking, wow, where did that come from? I didn't know that. Did I say that? Quite amazing sort of things that do emerge about your past lives. And some of the lives, you might think that you're going back to a certain era, but then when you do go back there, you suddenly find out why you went back there and how it can help you in this life. And that's what it's all about, how it can help you in this lifetime, not just some kind of, inquiry into, oh, I wonder what I was before. It doesn't work like that. So Pete took me back on several occasions, and one of them in particular, I've written about 3 of them in this book, but one in particular I just mentioned at this stage because it's the way Peter does this to find out why we go back to a past life. I went back to ancient Greece, and I was a young philosopher trained in the Plato. I got Pluto, the planet, in my mind. Trained by Plato. Plato had long since passed, but he had a series of schools that lived on many years after his transition. So my name was Kassos, K-A-S-O-S, in this lifetime, and I was. Greece was under Roman occupation at this particular time, so it was long after the glory days of Greece, and I was grabbed by the army because the army knew the general knew the head of my academy where I'd been studying, and I was recommended to go and help the Romans put down this kind of insurrection in places in the hills and everything around the ancient city of Sparta. So I was taken along with them. I was the token Greek because I was able to speak and translate for them. And I went along with this. And it was amazing because when I just remember I was Cassos. Now, sometimes we can just look at on the sidelines and see our past lives. And this time I was actually Cassos. And that's a process called revivification. And you actually are that particular person. And I knew I was there. I didn't remember all the details. I had to listen back. But Cassos was the token Greek there, and the Romans, the soldiers teased him and did all sorts of things, called him Alexander the Great and all that sort of stuff, the way soldiers are. So unfortunately, the insurrection was put down in a very, very violent way. The Romans were not exactly subtle in those particular times. They were out there to actually quell anything, make sure that everybody knew they were the masters, they dominated. So they left some pretty strong messages. So when I went back again to Greece, to Athens, I was pretty shocked about the whole thing. After this lifetime, and I thought, very interesting as I'm listening back, why would I go back to this lifetime? Well, then Peter asked me a question, and I'm going to, if you don't mind, even if you do, I'm going to read a little bit from my book, Past Lives Unveiled, because this gives the reason and how we can find out about our past lives. Because Peter then connected at the end of this particular regression with Cassos. He connected with my soul energy. So he had my soul energy, Cassos there, and me sort of in the middle, and him urging me gently on, as I say here, urge my soul to go deeper and across the lineage of every lifetime I've lived, and asked why it was important for me to see this particular lifetime. My answer was to respect each other, to understand that because we have a way of life that is not necessarily the best or the only way of life, there are many cultures, many belief systems, histories, attitudes, behavioral patterns. There is not one common behavior pattern. That is what humanity is, a huge variety, and we need to learn to respect this. I need to learn to respect this. And Peter then asked me to help him understand the message, and my quote here was, humanity is like a diamond. It has many facets, but each one of these facets makes up the whole. Humanity is not one single facet, it's just part of a network, a tapestry. And he asked what messages I needed to bring back for this book. And my answer here, as my soul answer, this is, of course, we are all part of each facet. There's a little bit of us represented everywhere. We have no right to look down on another part of the world, another race, or another belief system. We are all part of this, the diamond, and we may well have been an integral part of all of these facets at some stage. Where we are at the moment is just one phase of the entire existence. Now, when I read that, I suddenly realized what's going on in the world today. It's the world of division. The world of, if you don't believe what I believe, you're wrong, you're stupid, get out of here. That doesn't matter whether it's something to do with the afterlife or whether it's to do with the acceptance of UFOs or any aspect of life that may be a bit controversial, political, whatever. We've just had an election here. If you didn't believe it with one party, then you were an idiot. And this is going on all over the world right now, this division. So I think the message that I had there that I can put out in the book, that I hope that it will get to some people and help a few people here and there. That humanity is, as I said, like a diamond with many, many, many facets. It's interesting that the lives that we have, sometimes we can pick up from a previous life. Now, I have one amazing case that I don't know, I guess you all know Carolyn Mace, do you? A few nodding heads there. Carolyn Mace, Anatomy of Spirit, and many other books, Medical Intuitive. I've interviewed Carolyn a couple of times. She's a fantastic person. Now, Carolyn worked with a wonderful doctor called Dr. Norm Shealy. Now, Norm Shealy is he was a famous neurosurgeon. He is also the inventor of the TENS machine, a pain management machine in this particular lifetime. I've had a wonderful chat with Norm as well. He's a brilliant man. He's now in his 80s, runs a wellness center in Missouri, would you believe? But he's started off as a skeptic, had all sorts of things happen to him. Now is a total believer in everything spiritual, past lives, everything. In fact, the past life story that he had was quite famous, because he went along to a talk, and he was sitting there listening to this bloke, thinking, what's he talking about? Anyway, he was talking about this doctor called Dr. John Elliotson, who was in the 19th century. And all of a sudden, out of the blue, Norm suddenly thought, that was me. Now, he had no affiliation or thoughts or anything about past lives. This came to him like a bolt from the blue. That was me. So he felt he had to go and check it out. Long story short here, he went to London, was led by spirit, found out that he was Dr. John Elliotson. There was no doubt about it. And he was picking up the traces of the life as Elliotson to the life now as Dr. Norm Shealy. An incredible sequence of events. But I've written about it fully. Now, I've got a picture here, and I've got it in the book, but I'll hold it up because you should be able to all see it. On the left-hand side is Elliotson, and on the right side is Norm Shealy at around about the same age. So if I hold that up here, can you see? I'll hold it as close as I can. Can you all see that okay? Now look at them. Look at them. They could be brothers. They could almost be twins. That's incredible. From one lifetime to another. 19th century, Norm is now in his 80s, so 20th century. But he had to come back and change a few things and pick up a few things and correct a few things from his life as John Elliot. Now, this happens quite a lot. Not as often as you would like to believe, but that is one outstanding case. And because the man is a neurosurgeon, highly respected in the medical field, what he says, what he does, I believe has a huge amount of credibility, and a lovely, lovely man as well. There are others. I've quoted another story about a friend of mine who was a musician, and he went back to a past life and found out that he was actually a musician who died very young in Chicago in the jazz era. And as a kid, he couldn't understand his fascination for jazz as he was growing up as a little kid, when all his friends were listening to rock and roll. And Tom Smith, that's another amazing story. I mentioned before, to keep you an eye on the time here, I mentioned before about past lives and other worlds. Now, Pete Smith has done a lot of past life regression work, and he says that the vast majority of the people he has regressed have had at least one life on another world. So all this bit about, oh, we are the only humanity in the entire universe, well, how arrogant is that for a start? Of course, there are many, many different worlds, many different forms of life. Not all humanoid, of course. There are many kinds of life. We expect to go out there and see a bunch of people walking around, and if they're not like us, they're probably little green men or the greys or whatever. There are many, many kinds of life form. Pure energy. There's flame. There's just pure energy. And it's all working not only on other worlds, but in other dimensions as well. So Pete's done a lot of this, studies of lives on other worlds, and he actually put me through a regression on that, and I found out that I had an amazing experience on that. Too long to go into here, but it's something just to think about anyway, that we do have other lives and other worlds, and after we've done our cycle here on Earth, we can well graduate back onto other planets or other lives or other worlds or other dimensions as well. Life is vast in this universe and in other universes. Michael Newton, I mentioned before, he did over 8,000 case studies, and I was given the honor of doing a radio tribute program to him when he passed in 2016, and then also given a couple of case studies for my book that have never been published, apart from given out to members of the Institute. And this involves two sisters who were regressed independently and without knowledge of the other one being regressed to a life in an ancient Stone Age tribe. And it's fascinating. It really is. And they back each other up with names and events and all sorts of things like that, independently, had no idea, and they lived hundreds of miles apart. So there's some fascinating stories that are around for past lives. There's so many of them when you start researching them. So I was delighted to be able to have these cases by Pete, by Michael Newton, and various other people as well. One thing I'll just quickly finish with, as I said, I had another past life. Excuse me one moment. A few weeks ago, I went down to a seminar in Melbourne that Peter Smith was running, and Peter's now moved on to quantum consciousness. That's his area of expertise, and we're doing some work together in this area as well. And consciousness, of course, is debated by a lot of scientists, only related to the mind, but consciousness basically is our soul, it's our energy, it's our ongoing energy, our consciousness. That's why the subheading of my book is Discover How Consciousness Moves Between Lives. Anyway, I've had for years a very bad trembling left hand, like this was going all the time. Now, it was getting worse. And I went down to the seminar, and Pete did a whole series of meditations. It was a weekend seminar on quantum consciousness. And we went back into a past life, and I went back to a Tudor life. And I was a young man being interviewed for a position in the court with a man of nobility. And he was a very arrogant, brusque man. I'm in charge. You get this job, you'll do what you're told. You don't question. You just do everything I tell you. Don't make mistakes. And I was given the name Sir Francis Walsingham. And I didn't know who Sir Francis Walsingham was when I came down to the regression. So we checked out, and Sir Francis Walsingham turned out to be Queen Elizabeth II's private secretary. And he was also a spy master. So quite a leading figure. So I can imagine as a young man, I was being interviewed for a job as a clerk, a very lowly position, but I was terrified and I was shaking. And I mentioned this in my sharing as I was doing after this. And my partner, Anne, who was sitting next to me, suddenly brought up this question about the trembling with fear. And she talked about the trembling in my left hand. And there was obviously a correlation. So after the first day of the seminar, Pete took me aside and we did another little regression. And he just put his hand on my shoulder. And he did this several times when we were doing previous regressions. And I immediately went into a state of regression once again. So it was obviously a post-hypnotic suggestion that he put there. And I went back to this lifetime. I found out my name was Thomas. I was being interviewed for this particular job by Sir Francis Walsingham. Yes, I was terrified, and my trembling had started because my hand had been run over by a carriage in that particular lifetime. So my hand was, I don't know whether it was useless or what, but it was obviously badly injured. So Pete then got together all the souls from my soul lineage that related to this particular condition of fear. Now, there were 6 souls that came in altogether, and they were all warrior souls. I've had a lot of lives as a warrior, a soldier. So you can imagine as a soldier, the fear of oncoming battle, the fear of death, the fear of being horribly wounded, whatever. So they were all related to fear. So I got them all together, and then they all agreed to release this particular fear from the lineage of souls. And we were able to do that. And since then, I've been able to, my hand is like that now. I couldn't pick up a cup of tea or a glass of water or whatever before, and I'd spill it everywhere. So now my hand it trembles every now and then, but it's probably about, well over 90% better than it ever was. So I think that is such a wonderful explanation of the benefits of past life healing. This was a very short healing, and it's helped me tremendously in one small area of my life. So you can imagine how it can help us in many other areas that we're coming back to learn, to grow, to get over our mistakes, to clear our karma, whether it be with people, whether it be with ourselves, whether it be whatever. And I think the whole area of past lives is such a fascinating study that I'm delighted and very honored by being picked up by Spirit to be able to write this particular book and add my thoughts, words, research into that of a lot of other people around the world as well. So thank you very much. And if anybody's got any questions at this stage, then I'd love to be able to answer some questions.
I'm wondering how this fits in, and you can help me to put the piece into this puzzle. We've had in Leslie Flint's sessions, he's had Confucius come through, Roman soldiers, Roman residents. A woman came through and actually sang a lullaby in one of his sessions.
Great.
Ancient Egyptians have come through. And in Anthony Borgia's book, one of the characters, or one of the people that they had met on the other side, said that he had been there for 1,000 years. Now, how does the individual who is living now on the next plane of life or another plane of life, that individual still lives? And how does that fit in with your view of reincarnation?
Great. Thanks for asking that, Craig, because the one thing that we look at is the fact that, and Michael Newton researched this, and my own research backs it up, that we don't bring our entire soul energy back at every lifetime, that we bring a percentage of it back. So that percentage that stays on in the world of spirit is our true self, and we can react with that particular aspect of our energy. And what we're coming back here with is to be able to work in association. Some people would call it our higher self, our oversoul, or whatever. There are lots of different labels around, but we are able to do that. Now, I've learned how to connect with my own soul now, so I can get some messages and thoughts from my soul. So that is going on, and that aspect of me may well have been in the world of spirit, that other dimensional area, for hundreds of thousands of, who knows how long. I mean, what's time anyway? As we all know, it's a third dimensional reality. There's no such thing as time. So it's one of those questions, Craig, that we could sort of chat about for hours, I think, without necessarily coming up with the kind of answer that you could write in a 200-word essay.
Yeah, but I think that's a good answer. And your analogy of the diamond with many facets is one that I've heard. I've also heard the daisy with many petals.
Oh, okay.
And the individual, the higher self, has all of these individuals.
Yes.
And it's it's part of the higher self that incarnates, but that individual is still there, is intact, is still growing.
Oh, yes.
Still going on spiritually to higher levels. So that is what I've heard as well.
Yeah, and that's true, and how we can connect in the dream state with our higher self, with that soul energy, who is still working with our guides and everything. I mean, as you said, Anthony Borgia has written a wonderful book. I really love that, and it's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
I know Wendy and Victor quote Anthony Borgia quite a lot in the Afterlife Report on a Friday. So his information is quite wonderful. Thanks for that, Greg.
Thank you.
Pat.
Could you please, Barry, thank you for your information, but I'm wondering if you could please speak to either the myth of or the facts surrounding the concept of old soul and not such an old soul.
Sure. Okay.
I have had mediums to share similar kind of information, but more psychic than mediumistic.
Yeah.
Your help would be appreciated.
Okay. Well, look, I researched this for my second book, No Goodbyes, and I was told that new souls are being created all the time. They have to be. Souls are also coming from other worlds to incarnate on our world at the moment because of the amazing transformation that's happening. And 2020 is going to be quite some time, quite amazing time, believe me. So starting off in January next year, just keep yourselves completely organized in your life, because who knows what's going to happen. But old souls, well, we've all been around. I mean, I've been told from my guides that this is my 66th life. Well, some of us may have had 666. I don't know. Does it really matter? Is a number at this particular stage? It's the experience. And maybe an old soul is bringing back information that needs to be shared, knowledge, experience, or maybe just very slow learners. I don't know. As I said, every person is unique. Every situation is unique. And to be able to generalize on a story like this, or a question like this, is very, very hard. But yes, there are old souls. There are souls that have been around for a long, long time. I mean, look at me, ancient Greece. Look at the sisters that Michael Newton regressed. 30,000 BC they went back to a Stone Age tribe, and they're still hanging around. So does that mean they're slow learners? I don't know. It just means that they're here now, and who knows where they went in between the lives on this planet, into many other worlds. And that's some of the cases that Peter has actually given me for my book, some cases on other worlds, and some fascinating other worlds. Water worlds, for instance, just pure water, where the people on those other worlds were some kind of like a jellyfish kind of a thing. It's just unbelievable sort of situations that can occur. It's not, you know, we're so arrogant, we think the human form is the be all and end all. It's not. It really isn't.
I wanted to ask a question. I don't know if you're able to answer this, Barry, but you had spoken just briefly about 2020, and Elaine Thorpe, her guide Jonathan, also has come through and talked about big changes in 2020.
Yeah.
He mentioned something about when you go to sleep and when you wake up on and it's 2020, people are going to feel a difference. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Look, I don't know. From my research, and I'm working with a conference called the Cosmic Consciousness, which I did earlier this year, and we're doing another one in Uluru, the centre of Australia, in January the 12th, 2020. It comes down to planetary situations here. It's a Saturn-Pluto, which is Saturn is the establishment, the solidarity, everything like that, the world that we know, and Pluto was the god of the underworld. Everything in astrology is archetypal. So it's the death of the old for the birth of the new. So once again, we're looking at a whole new situation here. And I know that in Australia, for instance, our elders here in our Indigenous tribes, our First Nation people, are talking about the end of times. And they've been talking about a prophecy which is thousands of years old, and it's now all starting to happen. And they are saying that it's not an asteroid hitting the Earth. It's not necessarily tsunamis or anything like that. If it is a tsunami, it's more like a tsunami of consciousness. And whether we're all going to wake up or what's going to happen, well, nobody really knows. But January the 12th, there's a very strong planetary lineup, and this is when it's going to start to begin. Well, it's already started, actually, starting this month. But it's the precursor. So things are changing, and the old saying, you know, it's always darkest before dawn. And you look at what's going on in the world right now, things are pretty dark in many areas. So maybe that's what's happening. But it's hard to say that what is exactly going to happen, because we haven't been through this in our recorded history anyway. Maybe we have many hundreds of thousands of years ago, when we look at ancient civilizations. And there's been many on this planet, many.
Barry, we have a lot of parents whose children have transitioned.
Yeah. And
they're very resistant to reincarnation. They will often say, oh my God, if my child has reincarnated, I'm only living to be reunited with my child. And if they've been reincarnated, that won't happen.
But as I said before, there's always that aspect of us that stays our higher self, that energy, which is always in the world of spirit. So we will be reconnected with our loved ones. We will be reconnected with our children. But you know, it's too broad a question to ask, is this going to happen to my child or happen to somebody else's child or whatever? As we know, there's the Council of Elders, there's guides, there's all sorts of things. There's a hierarchy in the afterlife, the world of spirit, that decides these things. But we are all part of that. And this is where and as you know, we all meet at various times out of the body in the dream state. So there is a reconnection. There's even a reconnection when a child is transitioned now. We can still, as we all know, whether it's a dream contact or contact through mediums or whatever, we don't have to lose that contact. And that's most important. But I do believe that the higher self is the answer to all of this. And that is always part of us in the world of spirit. So we are always able to reconnect at that level, at a much higher level. We bring everything back to the humanity. We bring it back to daily life on Earth. And this is only just a very small part of the universal reality.
Yeah, I'm wondering about that too. I've read some about people who feel that their child reincarnates and comes back in the same family, especially in other cultures like Thailand and places like that.
Yeah. Oh, well, of course, there's always that belief that Dalai Lama is reincarnated from previous lives as well. And once again, I think there's an aspect of this that how can we answer that question definitively? We can only investigate these things and ask. I really couldn't answer that question because, as I said, 7 billion people, there are unique lives, where they come from, how they live, where they go to next. That's a question for the higher sources on the other side to work out.
Yeah. Thank you.
I wish I could be more definite.
No, I feel so too. I had one interesting experience. I interviewed, I went to Bhutan and did educational research, and I interviewed he had been the secretary for 2 of the kings in Bhutan, and he was a lama and had, as a child, he had found something that was hidden, and they felt that he was the reincarnation of somebody from the past. Intriguing, but as you said, for them it was proof because he found this lost thing that no one knew where it was. But it's I think too it's a mystery in some ways.
Well, it is, and as I mentioned before about these children that do come back again, and as in the first few years of their life, they do remember other lives, and as a child then brought in to meet their family. I mean, how would you feel if all of a sudden a child was brought over to you and it turned out to be a mother who'd passed over 25 years ago? I mean, my mother passed over in 1994, so if a child came back now and said, Barry, why didn't you do your homework or whatever? I think, that was my mother. But I'd be delighted that I could be reconnected in whatever way. And if that's the universal plan, that I'm going to be reconnected with her on this planet or in whatever way, then I believe that's all part. Because we can't just come and go from what I've been told from the world of spirit. We can't just arrive when we feel like it, interfere in other people's lives, our family or whatever. There are control, there are guides to give us permission to come back. We can't always come back and just warn somebody, don't drive today because you're going to have an accident. Maybe we need to have that accident. Maybe we need to learn. So it's not controlled from the other side. They are only allowed to share so much with us from what my information is from my guides.
I recently had to put down my last little dog. I've always had dogs, but my favorite of all my little dogs passed a few years ago, and I do EVP work. I communicate with spirit through an electronic sound source, and I do have a son in spirit. And a few years ago, my little dog Steven started coming through and saying he wanted to come back very badly, and that he was very upset at my other dog Nellie because she had been with me for a year before he was ever born and has lived many years on after him, and knew that I would not be willing to take a new puppy while she was old and ailing. And as soon as she passed, he was going to come back. So about a month ago, I had to put Nellie down because she was old and ailing and whimpering all the time and sick. And my spirit team comes through and says, well, Steven's making plans and really wants to come back. And we want you to contact the breeder that you got Steven from and send her a deposit to hold a pup, and we'll give you instructions. And I said, okay, and I did contact her. And about a few weeks ago, I was on the line, and I have to concentrate so hard to hear the words that I sometimes get kind of sleepy, because I think I kind of get into a trance state. So my son comes on and he's like, Mom, wake up, focus. Steven's been conceived. He's now in a little female that just got to a mom that was just impregnated. And so I write the breeder an email her, and I go, by any chance, have there been any, litters just conceived? And she just wrote me back and said, well, yes, I have 2 girls that were recently bred. And my spirit team tells me that I am to tell her that when the litter is born, if she takes a picture of it, they will tell me which one is mine. And look, I mean, I don't know if I'm really going to have my Stephen back. I know I'm going to get a little female puppy around October, but I think that it's, I mean, I think anything's possible, but clearly that this is what they tell me, you know, and they said, we can do this. The hard part is having a counterpart on Earth who can hear us, who will then follow through. It's not that Stephen can't. And it's very funny because earlier on, my son Danny and Stephen came on and said, we're going to see like, there's a little litter already growing. We're going to see if we can like get Stephen in. And then Harry Edwards, who's been my healer and mentor, friend, teacher since I was 20, he gets on the next morning. He goes, Sherry, you know very well you can't bump a soul. Your son and that little dog were up to no good. They couldn't achieve this because you can't just bump a soul that's already, you know, starting to take form. And if you want Stephen, you're going to have to wait for another baby to be conceived.
But look, as I said before, if Dr. Norm Shealy can come back from one lifetime as a doctor to pick up the traces in a second lifetime because he had unfinished business, then why can't a soul who may be left in the very early stages, and there's a reason, you know, that we transition at whatever time, because our soul knows that it's time to go back into the world of spirit. It wasn't the right time for many reasons. Why couldn't they come back again and pick up? I mean, I'm not saying it happens all the time, but I think there are so many aspects of reincarnation, of life, that we can't just sort of speculate and generalize in any way, because there was, as I said, over 7 billion stories on this planet. It's wonderful. I'd just like to say at this stage, I've been working in the last few weeks with a film director by the name of Bill Bennett. Now, Bill contacted me through my publicist in the United States, and he's an Australian film director, but he's won awards. He's made Hollywood films. He's worked with people like Sandra Bullock and all sorts of people. But recently, a few years ago, he had this amazing experience and then turned around and wanted to find out why he had this voice that came out of nowhere to save his life. So he made this incredible movie called PGS. It is called a Personal Guidance System, which is all about intuition. And it's available. Just Google PGS, the movie, or Bill Bennett, and you can download it. It's wonderful. It's fantastic stuff. And he had this spiritual transformation. He was a skeptic. He didn't believe in any of this stuff. He's now totally, in 4 years, his life has opened up amazingly. He's making 2 more films. He's had people on his documentary PGS, people like Carolyn Mace, people like James Van Prague, people like Lee Carroll, and so many others. And I've been honored by being asked to be in the next 2 films that he's making, which is going to be fantastic. He's doing one on fear and then one on The Veil, which is, and they're released worldwide, and you can arrange screenings and all sorts of things like that. But go and have a look at his website, Bill Bennett, PGS, Personal Guidance System, and it just shows how we are developing, I think, as people, because there are so many of us being given the opportunity to spread the word. And I was told that I had to write my books to help remove the fear of life after death and the fear of ongoing life, because I can't believe any skeptic that would say, how can you prove anything beyond at the end of this life you go into a pit of blackness? I mean, that's the ultimate despair, isn't it? Surely. Unbelievable. So when you have stories like Bill, and he's on my radio program this week, actually. So if you went to radiooutthere.com, you can hear the interview with Bill, an amazing man. But here he is, a well-known film director, former cynical journalist, and now a real man of spirit. Went to India, worked with gurus, did everything. An incredible man, and a delightful person as well.
Hi, hello everyone. It has been fascinating listening to it all, and I do have one experience. It was not a fully qualified regressionist, but a very good medium. And when Barry said it's important to have a session recorded, we did try. And at the start of the session, everything was clear. We could hear her voice. She talked me down. And then when I started to speak, all we got was static. For the whole of the session, it was static. Yeah. And when I came out of it, the recording started again normally.
Yeah.
but the pictures and the memories of that and of that life are still living with me all the time. Well, not all the time, but if I think of them, I can remember all the different ones. I remember her name. And as you said, I was that person. I wasn't standing watching them. I was in there and I was experiencing it as it all went on around me. She was well, she was considered a witch, but she really was a clairvoyant. But she couldn't keep her mouth shut, and she tried to tell everybody. So she was driven out of the village. Finally chased by the young boys of the village until she went off the cliff. And I remember saying, I would have been all right if it wasn't for the wind. And all my life, I'd had a fear of wind and high cliffs and drowning, which is how she died. So yeah, it carried on into this life, those memories. And I would say it was probably about 150, 200 years ago. It's setting in Cornwall. But yeah, very, very, very vivid memories.
So, Anne, have you been able to work through those fears in this lifetime? The fear of the wind, the fear of
pretty well. I still don't like wind.
No, I don't.
Living near the coast, near the west coast now, we get a lot of wind at the moment across my garden. So some days it's stay inside, it's just too windy. But I'm not so bad with cliffs, and I have got over my fear of water.
There you are, you see. By going back to that past life, that can help. It's a good illustration of how we can benefit from past life therapy.
Mm.
Can I just comment on that one as well about the energy? Years ago, I was doing a stage show with a couple of very well-known mediums here, Ezio De Angelis, whom I know Wendy and Victor know well, and another wonderful medium called Kate Barnes. And we would go into these various live venues, and as soon as we started to connect with the other side, we would have so many microphone problems. We would have static, we would have all of this, and it's to do with the vibration. As we all know, in the world of spirit, it's a very different vibration in that dimension, and we've got to raise our vibrations. I was told many years ago when I went over to Brazil to the John of God Casa, and I had some operations over there at that particular stage, and I was given these wonderful crystals, and I was told to go away with these crystals from Brazil, raise my vibrations, and to be able to tune in. And having done that, I was able to use these huge crystals about that big, and I was able a female and a male one. So I'd hold the female one in the left hand and the male one in the right hand, and then I was able to go into other dimensions of reality via these crystals. Quite amazing. But I was told psychically I had to raise my vibrations to be able to do this. And I think this is what happens when we have those connections from the other side. We do have that. If they haven't been able to lower their vibrations, this can reflect in microphones, in static, in all sorts of things. So it's that can be one explanation anyway.
Yes, I have experienced that in circles, in physical circles, and sometimes just in a trance circle, when the guide coming through, they haven't been able to balance for us to catch it on the recording, and the recording just blanks. And then a bit later it will come on again.
Yeah.
I loved it, every minute of it. You're really clear. I guess all that years in radio make you a very clear speaker. But it's been fascinating, and I will definitely be looking into your radio show and all the things you mentioned, the books, because I believe in what you've said. I've experienced some of it, and we're lucky to have you. Thank you so much for coming with our group.
Well, that's my pleasure. And you're one of the very first guests I had. I used to do this on mainstream radio before going on to the internet. And one of my very, very early guests was one Victor Zammit. We've gone back a long way. We go back about nearly 20 years.